Spoiler alert, your first draft is probably a mess, but don't worry, that's exactly where you're supposed to be. So let's go through a step-by-step process of how to clean up that first draft. As a book coach, I see drafts all along the spectrum, from the very, very messy beginnings all the way to a polished draft. But as a developmental editor, I spend most of my time in the second or third draft range. And if you're considering hiring a professional editor, you'll likely want to do a lot of these steps yourself first as a first check. So you're not sending your super messy first draft to a developmental editor, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done still before you can get to the higher level of your novel that you're looking for. So before we get into the details, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the different types of editing. So as a refresher, a developmental editor is the first stage. It looks at the big picture stuff. This is like pacing, characters, plot, themes, subplots, story structure, all of the juicy, fun, good bits that make your story engaging for the reader. Line editing zooms in on the specific writing craft. So this is a lower level. We're looking at sentence structure here, flow, the writing style and language, making sure that the actual prose sounds good and is something that readers will stick with. Copy editing focuses on grammar, punctuation, and consistency. And finally, we have proofreading, which is polishing up those typos and finding any last-minute small mistakes. But today we're going to be focused on developmental editing, because that's where you're going to need to start first. We want to make sure that foundation is solid. So why do we start with the big edits first before we boil down to the small edits? And this is very simple. If you focus on grammar and punctuation or the smaller stuff first, then you're going to potentially waste your time, because you're going to rewrite parts of the book anyway. So we're going to want to make sure that the major rewrites are all in place before we spend time honing very specific language and our grammar. Okay, let's dig into the steps of how to edit your first draft. Step 1 is to splurge everything you know needs fixed. You've just finished your first draft, congratulations. Now you need to write everything down that you know needs work off of the top of your head. These are going to be things fresh in your mind. Just write it down in a list. Now that we've got the things off the top of our head down on our list, we're going to go to step 2, which is possibly take a break. You've just finished a massive project. Some writers like to take a little bit of a breather before they dive in with fresh eyes into their second draft. It can be great for you to recharge, spend a little time resting, but it also gives you the advantage of coming in with a bit of a clearer head, because you've spent some time away from the project. Step 3 is to make or update an outline. So if you wrote an outline before you wrote the book, revisit this outline and update it with any changes you've made. If you didn't make an outline before and you're more a discovery writer, then now is your time to make an outline by chapter. The reason why we're doing this is because it gives you a very big picture view of your story. It lets you see from a higher view quickly the different individual pieces, and it's also going to give you the chance to more easily move things around and see how different things will work by experimenting with the outline, as opposed to having to make changes in your actual manuscript. And you're also going to save a ton of time by not having to reread your manuscript every time that you're trying to make a big major structural change. This outline does not need to be fancy, it just needs to work for you. I want to make sure that you have all the major plot points in this outline, and that you have the flow and pacing of your book written in an easily identifiable document, so that you're saving yourself time from having to reread sections of your manuscript over and over again. Step 4 is to revisit that splurge list from step 1, and we're going to add to it. Once you make your outline, things are going to start popping up that you've identified as things that need work. And this is going to be another opportunity to just add more of those immediate thoughts that are coming to you about what needs fixed. Step 5 is to check for cause and effect. And this is going to be easy with your outline. So you're going to pull that out and look for your different scenes and things that are happening from chapter to chapter, and make sure that the chapter after chapter 1 inevitably happens because of something that happens in chapter 1. Okay, so we have chapter 1, plot happens, and because of that, chapter 2 happens. And because of that, chapter 3 happens. This is a very essential check to make sure that the events in your story are connected and that there's a story propulsion going throughout the entire novel, and it's just not a set of random events. We need to have this connection point so the story flows together. This is also a great logic checkpoint. Do the things in your story actually make sense? Let's say something dramatic happens to your protagonist and she has an emotional reaction which causes her to take a specific action. Is that action proportional to the thing that happened? Think about those logic points throughout your story as you're checking for this cause and effect. Step 6, separate story problems from writing craft problems. So remember when we talked about that big to small editing? This is identifying what is the big stuff and what is the smaller stuff. You may have splurged things like dialogue tags, or I need to fix my spelling of this name and be consistent. Those sort of things you're gonna put in the writing craft bucket, whereas the bigger ideas like your potential plot holes or pacing or character arcs are going to go over into the story section. Once we have these two sections, we can take the smaller writing craft edits and put those to the side. We're going to get to those way later and just focus in on those story edits. Step 7, we have our story edits now. We're going to start listing possible solutions for each of these issues. And this is going to result in the fun thing in developmental editing, which is the cascade effect. If we make a change to one part of the plot, there's inevitably some cascade effects for the rest of your story that you're going to have to map out at this point. You're likely also going to find some overlap, which is good news. So you're going through these different listed items. If you fix their motivation, this might fix something else that you identified as an issue. So you'll be able to start finding connections between the different lists and issues that you identified, but you're also going to be looking out for those cascade effects and making notes according to what you'll need to change in the future. This can be an awesome time to revisit that outline because you can play with it, you can move things around, you can make notes in each of the individual chapters. That is going to be a great aid for you as you go through this developmental edit process. Step 8 is to organize by category. So we have our problems listed out. Now let's organize this by things like character development, story structure, theme, world building, conflict and stakes, pacing, which includes your notes on cause and effect, plot logic, and reader engagement. This will help you see where the bulk of your work needs to happen and will help you prioritize. It's also just another way to get organized and make it a little less daunting to head into this stage. Step 9 is making a plan for your revision. So you're going to prioritize what you want to work on first, which should be the thing that has the most cascade effects. Again, we're talking about the biggest change that we're going to make first, which is usually story structure things. And that is going to have a cascade effect to different plot points. So that is the hardest to tackle, but usually the first that's best to tackle. This might be a time that you put tentative deadlines for yourself. If you're someone who is deadline motivated, you can put those next to each of your points that you're going to be tackling for your revision. And overall, you'll just want to view this as kind of your roadmap for your second draft. And now you're ready to dive in for your second draft. I know this part can feel pretty overwhelming, but hopefully all of these different steps can help you identify where you need to spend your time and chunk it into smaller ideas so it's a little bit easier to tackle. If you found the video helpful, I'd appreciate if you like it so that it can get out to more writers and help them get their messy first drafts in a good place. Thank you so much for watching and happy writing.